Welcome to Something About Sleep. We hope you'll let our stories guide you to a nice, peaceful slumber as you learn about history and what it was like to be a human in times long since past. Now, I need to get to sleep, and if you're watching this video, chances are you do too. So, without further ado, take it away.
Thank you, sir. On tonight's episode, we will explore Leonardo da Vinci's workshop, a quiet evening in Renaissance Florence. So join me here by the fire and rest your weary eyes as I tell you a tale from long, long ago. There is a small mystery waiting for us in Florence tonight. It is not the kind of mystery that asks to be solved with urgency. It does not require a hidden passage, a coded message, or a dramatic revelation. It is simply the question of an ordinary evening. What might it have felt like to step into a room where Leonardo da Vinci was still working after much of the city had begun to settle down? Before his pages were protected behind glass, before his paintings became destinations for travellers from around the world, and before his name became almost inseparable from the idea of genius, there were work days. There were wooden tables, uneven sheets of paper, small tools, cups, boxes, and the last useful portion of daylight. There were commissions that required patience. There were unfinished drawings. There were questions that remained questions when the lamps were lit and would still be waiting in the morning. So tonight, we are not going to rush through a list of Leonardo's accomplishments. We're not going to treat him as a collection of inventions or as a distant figure standing alone above his century. Instead, we're going to spend a quiet evening near his work table in Renaissance Florence. We will listen as the city gradually becomes softer beyond the doorway. We will notice the materials within reach of an artist's hand. We will follow a few lines on paper as they lead from a public mural to the movement of water, from the turn of a face to the curve of a bird's wing. The evening we're entering is a historically grounded reconstruction, rather than the record of one precisely documented night. Leonardo did not leave behind an account telling us where every sheet of paper lay, or how the light fell across a particular room at a particular hour. But the broad setting is real. During his second period in Florence, especially in the years around 1503 to 1505, Leonardo was working on preparations for the Battle of Anghiari, an ambitious public commission. On October 24, 1503, he received keys to a workspace in the Sala del Papa, the Pope's room at Santa Maria Novella. This gives us a doorway through which we can enter carefully, without pretending to know more than the surviving evidence allows. Leonardo was in his early 50s then. He had already spent years in Florence and Milan. He had studied painting, sculpture, mechanics, architecture, music, water, plants, animals, and the visible structure of the world around him. Yet the room we approach does not need to feel crowded with legends. It can remain simple. A large working space, a surface for drawing, the faint smell of wood and paper, a place in which an experienced artist might still pause over a line and consider whether it was true enough to what he had observed. Imagine that the late afternoon has already begun to loosen. The strongest light has left the upper walls of the city, though the stone still holds a little warmth. Somewhere nearby, someone is closing a shutter. A cart passes at a measured pace, and then is gone. The sound of footsteps changes as people begin to turn toward home. The day is not finished all at once. It folds inward gradually, street by street and doorway by doorway. At Santa Maria Novella, the shift is gentle. The public life of Florence remains only a short walk away, but the sound is quieter here. The room associated with Leonardo's work is not a magical chamber outside time. It belongs to a living city, a religious complex, and a practical commission. Yet it is easy to feel the appeal of lingering at its threshold. Inside, the ordinary and the remarkable may be lying side by side, a scrap of paper used for a quick note, a study of a horse turning under strain, a small geometric figure, a mark made simply because something in the world had been noticed and did not deserve to be forgotten. This is where our evening begins. We will enter slowly. We will allow the famous name to become quieter. And perhaps, as the lamps glow and the streets of Florence fade into the distance, we will meet not an icon but a working person, attentive, private, curious, and still surrounded by unfinished things. Before we go farther, you are welcome to leave a comment telling us where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. There is something comforting about knowing that people in different places can share the same quiet journey. And if relaxing history helps you settle in at the end of the day, you can like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment with the subject you would enjoy visiting next. For now, let us follow the remaining light through Florence and toward the workshop door. To reach Leonardo's room, it helps to begin outside it. Florence at the start of the 16th century was not a museum arranged for future visitors. Its buildings were inhabited, its streets worked hard, and its beauty was mixed with the practical needs of daily life. The city held merchants, artisans, apprentices, labourers, clergy, officials, families, travellers, and animals moving through lanes that could feel close and irregular. It was a place of stone and timber, thresholds and courtyards, conversations carried beneath windows, and workshops whose open fronts connected craft to the passing street. The hour before evening would not silence the city immediately. Work stopped in layers. A merchant might still be counting what remained from the day. A craftsman might gather tools from a bench in the same order he had learned to keep them years earlier. An apprentice might hurry with a final errand before the light weakened. A bundle of wood might be shifted from one doorway to another. A length of cloth might be drawn inside. The sounds were small, but together they made the rhythm of a city settling after labour. Above the roofs, the dome of Santa Maria del Fiore rose with a familiarity that later centuries sometimes make difficult to imagine. To us, Brunelleschi's dome can appear as an emblem, an achievement set apart and admired from a distance. To the people walking beneath it, it was also part of the daily skyline. It remained extraordinary, of course, but it belonged to errands, weather, bells, and the simple act of finding one's way through familiar streets. The bells mattered. Their sound helped shape the movement of the day, reaching across roofs and walls with a force gentler than any modern clock and harder to ignore. One bell could overlap with another. The notes might arrive differently according to where a listener stood, softened by corners and courtyards, momentarily clearer in an open square. Tonight, they do not need to be dramatic. Let them remain part of the background, reminding us that time in Florence was shared across the city through sound. A little farther away, the Arno carried its own quiet presence. You might not see the river from every street, but it belonged to Florence physically and imaginatively. Bridges gathered movement, water-shaped trade, planning, worry, opportunity and observation. Leonardo paid close attention to it, studying the valley and considering ambitious interventions in the river's course. Later, when we lean over his pages, the current will return in drawn lines and curling forms. For now, it is enough to sense the river somewhere beyond the buildings, continuing its movement while the workday slows. The Florence around us is often called Renaissance Florence, and the phrase is useful. It helps us understand a period of intense artistic production, intellectual exchange, civic ambition, religious devotion, competition, and skilled making. Yet the people closing their shutters tonight did not need to think of themselves as actors inside a historical label. Most were simply finishing tasks. A piece of work had been delivered or had not. A payment was expected. A household needed bread, oil, firewood, or cloth. A child was called indoors. A dog settled near a doorway. The city was important because daily life happened inside it. This ordinary life is worth keeping near us as we approach Leonardo. His curiosity did not float above the material world, it fed on it. The street provided faces, gestures, animals, weather, tools, water, dust, shadows, and countless variations in how things moved. A painter learned from looking, but looking was not a ceremonial act. It could happen while walking, waiting, speaking, or passing through a crowd. A question might begin with something glimpsed only briefly. A fold of fabric, the set of a shoulder, the turbulence behind an obstruction in a stream, the way a bird changed direction without any visible strain. At this hour the street offers a changing lesson in light. Stone no longer seems as flat or bright as it did at midday. Recesses deepen, surfaces become gentler. The colour of plaster shifts toward muted earth. A narrow street may already feel cool while a nearby wall still holds warmth. The contrast between brightness and shadow grows less distinct as evening approaches and the city loses some of its sharper edges. That softening is a suitable beginning for a visit to Leonardo. He's often remembered for the subtle transitions in his paintings, for forms that seem to emerge gradually rather than being held by harsh outlines. The evening itself offers a similar lesson. It does not move from day to night by a single step. It changes almost too slowly to notice. Only after a few minutes do you realize that the upper window is no longer bright, that the street is quieter, that a figure walking away has become harder to distinguish from the wall beyond. Somewhere, a workshop remains open a little longer than the others. This is not unusual. There is always one more surface to put in order, one more tool to wipe clean, one more mark worth making before the light is gone. Renaissance workshops depended on rhythm and routine. They could be places of teaching, production, repair, preparation, negotiation, and repetition. The finished objects that survive in museums often conceal the amount of ordinary labour required before an image could appear. Wood had to be chosen and prepared, pigments had to be ground, drawings had to be transferred, materials had to be stored, cleaned, moved, and replaced. As the city closes around us, we can feel the value of a room that is neither entirely public nor entirely private. Leonardo's workspace at Santa Maria Novella belonged to a civic project of unusual scale. The cartoon he was preparing for the Battle of Anghiari was intended to serve a major mural commission for the Palazzo Vecchio. The work would be connected to the public identity of Florence, to memory, and to the ambitions of the Republic. Yet the early stages depended on quieter acts, observing, drawing, revising, measuring, and considering how a body or a horse might turn within a composition larger than any ordinary sheet of paper. The city's artistic life belongs to this same practical rhythm. Florence supported a dense culture of making in which painters, sculptors, goldsmiths, woodworkers, masons, textile workers, and other skilled people lived near one another and learned from what the city demanded. A church, palace, household, civic building, procession, or devotional practice could create work for many hands. Art was not confined to a separate district of inspiration. It entered architecture, furniture, clothing, worship, commemoration and public identity. A workshop might face the street closely enough that labour remained partly visible. A passerby could notice a surface being prepared or an assistant carrying materials. The threshold separated inside from outside without sealing them apart completely. News, customers, deliveries, and questions could arrive through the same opening. The city flowed around the bench. For an artist, reputation mattered, but reputation did not replace negotiation. A commission involved expectations. A patron or official body might care about subject size, placement, payment and schedule. The artist had to translate broad ambition into a sequence of tasks that could actually be performed. Leonardo's Santa Maria Novella workspace belongs to this world. It is impressive because of the mind working within it, but also because Florence had created a practical setting in which a large design could be attempted. The city therefore teaches us how to approach the room. Do not imagine a sealed chamber where history is waiting silently to become famous. Imagine a place connected by many small threads to the streets outside. Paper purchased and carried, wood selected, messages delivered, assistants coming and going, officials expecting progress, bells marking the day, and the river continuing beyond the walls. The quiet of evening is meaningful precisely because it follows so much activity. This is one of the pleasant contradictions of the evening. A great public image begins with a hand moving across a surface in a room where the loudest sound may be paper shifting against wood. The subject might contain movement and strain, but the process can remain patient. The city outside can be full of competing voices, but a line is drawn one section at a time. We continue towards Santa Maria Novella. The streets narrow and then open again. The facade and complex gather the fading light differently from the smaller buildings nearby. Footsteps pass, then recede. The nearer we come, the less Florence feels like a broad historical panorama, and the more it becomes a series of immediate sensations. A door, a worn threshold, a quiet wall, a change in echo. The city has not vanished. It is simply allowing us to step away from its busier current. We are going inward now, toward the room that gives this evening its centre. Santa Maria Novella offers a change of pace before we even enter the room associated with Leonardo. The movement of the street does not stop at once, but it becomes more distant. Sound behaves differently near stone walls, courtyards, and interior passages. A voice that seemed distinct outside may arrive as only a trace. A footstep may briefly echo and then be absorbed. The city remains close, yet the atmosphere grows more contained. The complex had a long history before Leonardo came to work here. Its spaces belong to worship, community, hospitality, administration, study, and memory. The room that concerns us tonight was known as the Sala del Papa, or Pope's Room, a name connected to its earlier use during the Council of Florence in the 15th century. By the autumn of 1503, it had also become part of the practical story of Leonardo's large Florentine commission. On October 24 of that year, Leonardo received keys to the room for work connected with the preparatory cartoon of the Battle of Anghiari. A cartoon in this setting was not a humorous drawing. It was a full-scale preparatory design, an essential stage in organising an image meant for a much larger surface. For Leonardo, the room provided the space needed to think at an enlarged scale. The project reached beyond the dimensions of a portable panel painting. It required planning, physical arrangement, and a sustained attention to bodies in motion. We do not need to populate the room with every object associated with Leonardo's career. it is better to enter with restraint. The surviving record allows us to identify the setting and the commission, but it does not hand us a perfect inventory. So we will keep close to what a working room of this kind may plausibly have contained. Paper, drawing tools, supports, pieces of wood, containers, a few stools or benches, and the signs of a day's activity being brought gradually toward a pause. A large drawing project changes the way a room feels. Paper is no longer only something held easily in one hand or folded into a notebook. Sheets may need to be joined. Parts of the design may be studied separately and then understood as elements of a much wider whole. A head, a hand, a horse, or a fold of cloth can become a world in itself for an hour. The artist must move close and then step back. Nearness is useful for the accuracy of a mark. Distance is useful for understanding whether the parts remain alive together. There may be something quietly restful about this alternation. Approach, inspect, withdraw, make a line, reconsider it, allow the eye to travel outward. The work advances through small decisions rather than one sudden act of inspiration. Even a renowned artist must return repeatedly to the basics of looking. Leonardo's assignment was connected to a mural planned for the Salone dei Cinquecento, the great hall in the Palazzo Vecchio. The broader commission carried civic importance, and the image would refer to the Florentine victory at Anghiari in 1440. Yet tonight, we can leave the noise of battle outside the room. Leonardo's surviving studies invite a different kind of attention. They show the challenge of representing motion, the force within a turning horse, the angle of a face, the compression of figures, the pull between one direction and another. Such studies are not loud when viewed on paper. Their energy remains contained within strokes of chalk and ink. As we move through the room, the monastery-adjacent quiet helps change our relationship to the project. We do not need to see a vast public mural all at once. We can notice a single sheet. Perhaps it carries only a partial study. Perhaps the surface has been used economically, with a diagram near one edge and a line of notes placed where space allows. Paper was valuable enough to invite care, though Leonardo's pages often reveal an active mind that used available space with remarkable freedom. The name Pope's Room also gives the setting a history beyond Leonardo. The room was not created for an artist dreaming privately over notebooks. It belonged to a complex with earlier functions and earlier memories. Its association with papal use reached back to the Council of Florence in 1439. By Leonardo's time, the space could be adapted again, now to the practical needs of a major drawing project. The change is revealing. Renaissance buildings were not frozen monuments. Rooms were used, reused, and given new purposes as circumstances required. That history can remain lightly in the background. We do not need to reconstruct every earlier occupant. It is enough to feel that Leonardo's work entered a room already shaped by time. The walls had witnessed other forms of attention, formal meetings, religious movement, practical arrangements, and the ordinary maintenance required by any living complex. The artist's cartoon did not float into an empty stage. It joined an existing place. The keys themselves are a modest but satisfying detail. They make access physical. Someone had to hand them over. A door had to be opened. The assignment of a workroom became real through an ordinary object carried in the hand. A civic commission of impressive scale begins, at least in part, with permission to enter a room and use it. The room itself may have seemed generous compared with the smaller studios and shop fronts of the city. It had to accommodate preparation on a substantial scale. but size does not automatically make a space grand. A large workroom late in the day can feel almost humble. The corners darken first. The empty portion of a wall becomes more noticeable. The objects nearest the table draw the eye while the rest of the room recedes. There is a useful distinction here between a studio, as later imagination often pictures it, and a workspace as it was lived. We tend to romanticize the artist's room, filling it with symbols of brilliance. Yet a workshop earns its character through use. A board bears marks because it has supported work. A container is important because something must be kept in it. A rag, a knife, a piece of chalk, or a length of cord matters because making depends on practical acts repeated until they become almost invisible. Leonardo had spent years learning and working within such a culture. He did not arrive at Santa Maria Novella as a detached philosopher who happened to draw. He was an artist shaped by apprenticeship, materials, commissions, deadlines, patrons, assistants, and the demands of surfaces. His studies of water and flight may widen our sense of his curiosity, but his hands still belong to the world of craft. This is why the Sala del Papa makes such a fitting place for our evening. It allows several sides of Leonardo to meet without forcing them together. Here is the painter preparing a civic composition. Here is the draftsman testing the truth of movement. Here is the experienced maker who understands that a large idea must become a sequence of manageable tasks, and somewhere within the same habits of attention is the observer who may turn from a horse's neck to a flowing current, from a human expression to the changing passage of light. The last daylight does not illuminate the entire room evenly now. It reaches some surfaces and leaves others indistinct. A sheet near the window can still be read more easily than one farther away. The difference encourages us to move slowly. There is no need to see everything. It is enough to let the room reveal itself in portions. We step across the threshold. The city is still there, reduced to a softer murmur beyond the walls. The Pope's room waits around us, not as a shrine, but as a place of work, paused near the edge of evening. Once inside, it is tempting to search immediately for the famous things. We might expect a recognizable painting, a miraculous design, or a page filled with some idea that seems centuries ahead of its time. But the room asks for a slower kind of attention. Before anything becomes famous, it is material. Paper lies flat or curls slightly at an edge. Wood carries grain, weight, and the small irregularities left by use. Dust gathers in corners. A tool remains where someone set it down. The first impression is not grandeur. It is texture. A work table stands as the practical centre of the room. We should not claim its exact shape or arrangement, but a table is a reasonable companion to the tasks at hand. Its surface may be crowded in places and almost empty in others. A few sheets could be stacked with care. Others might rest separately because the ink is still drying or because a question has not yet been settled. Small containers help divide one kind of work from another. There may be chalk, a stylus, pen and ink, pieces of charcoal, and materials used to prepare or transfer drawings. The papers vary in purpose. Some hold rapid observations, made before a thought could disappear. Some carry more deliberate studies. A line may be reinforced, adjusted, or placed beside another attempt. The page does not always present a clean journey from first idea to final decision. It can preserve hesitation. This is part of its intimacy. In a finished painting, reconsideration is often hidden beneath later layers. On a working sheet, the mind remains visible in its turns. The Royal Collection today holds hundreds of Leonardo's drawings, many only loosely connected to finished artistic projects. Together they suggest the breadth of his effort to record and understand the world. But tonight there is no need to imagine hundreds of sheets in one room. One is enough. A single page can contain several scales of attention. A curling line of water, a small mechanical arrangement, a profile, a list, a correction, an empty interval where the hand moved elsewhere. Light is becoming a practical concern. Natural daylight has always shaped the workshop day, and as it weakens, the room changes. A lamp or candle can extend work into evening, but it does not replace the balanced clarity of daylight. It creates a local circle. Objects nearest the flame become more distinct. Shadows deepen behind them. The room is not uniformly dark, nor is it bright. It is divided gently into areas of attention and rest. This limited light encourages patience. A line must be approached rather than taken in at a glance. The grain of paper appears and disappears as the angle shifts. The sheen on a small container catches the eye briefly. A piece of wood leaning against a wall becomes only a shape. In the farthest parts of the room, certainty gives way to suggestion. The air carries the quiet smells of work. Wood, paper, perhaps a little oil, glue, chalk, and the faint mineral presence of pigments stored for use. These are not perfumes arranged for atmosphere. They belong to preparation. A Renaissance artist's practice relied on matter, ground colour, prepared surfaces, brushes, panels, cloths, binders, and the steady labour that kept everything ready enough for the next stage. Some materials require time before they can be used. A wooden panel must be chosen and prepared. Grounds must be laid and allowed to settle. Pigment does not become paint by wish alone. The workshop teaches a kind of humility, because every idea encounters a surface with its own behaviour. Wood may respond to moisture. Paper may absorb ink differently from one sheet to another. A brush may carry too much or too little. A layer may need to dry before another can be added. Even drawing, which can feel immediate, depends on tools and habits. Metal point leaves a different mark from chalk. Ink commits the hand differently from a dry medium that can be softened or revised. Red chalk, black chalk, pen, stylus, and prepared paper each invite a distinct relationship between eye and hand. Leonardo used drawing not only to describe what he had seen, but also to think through what he had not yet fully understood. Near one edge of the table, perhaps there is cord or a straight edge used in organising proportions. Elsewhere, a piece of folded paper waits to be opened. A larger surface may occupy part of the room in relation to the Anghiari cartoon. The scale of that work asks for coordination. It cannot be understood entirely from the seated position. The body of the artist must move through the workspace, carrying the eye from detail to whole and back again. This movement adds another quiet rhythm. The stool shifts slightly. Footsteps cross a short distance. A page is lifted, turned, set down, or held nearer the light. A hand brushes away a particle. Nothing happens quickly, yet the room is not idle. It is full of small adjustments. We can allow the remaining light to rest on ordinary objects because they tell us something important about Leonardo. His reputation is so large that it can obscure the conditions of his work. But the world he studied did not reach him in abstract form. It arrived through surfaces, resistance, weight, moisture, colour, and motion. To understand a current, he watched water behave. To understand a wing, he considered the structure and movement of flight. To understand a face, he observed how expression altered features. To make an image, He had to choose marks and materials capable of carrying those observations into another form. The room also holds the signs of other hands. Even when Leonardo works alone for a time, the workshop world is not solitary in the strictest sense. Someone may have prepared a material earlier. Someone may have carried in paper, cleaned a tool, moved a board, or assisted with a practical task. A major project rarely exists through one person's effort alone. The artist's name may become the one remembered, but the physical culture of making includes many quieter contributions. For now, those other figures have mostly receded with the day. Their absence creates the slight loneliness of the room without making it sad. It is the peaceful emptiness that follows shared work. A bench is unoccupied. A task has been left ready for morning. The room retains the shape of activity even as it settles. Paper itself deserves a little more time. In later centuries, surviving drawings are mounted, conserved, photographed, catalogued and handled with exceptional care. In a working room, paper was still precious, but it had not yet become a relic. It was a usable material. A sheet might be selected for a deliberate study, joined to other sheets for a larger design, folded for convenience, or employed wherever enough open space remained. The blank surface was valuable enough to invite economy. The process of making paper placed the workshop within a wider network of labour. Rag fibres had to be broken down, suspended in water, gathered on a mould, pressed, dried and finished. The exact history of any sheet in the room is beyond us, but its physical presence carries many earlier hands. Before Leonardo touches the surface, someone else has already made a sequence of skilled decisions. Thickness, texture, sizing and condition all affect the mark. A pen does not move across every sheet in the same way. Ink may settle quickly or spread slightly. Chalk grips the surface according to its texture. A stylus can leave a preliminary path so faint that it becomes visible only when the light turns across it. Metal point requires its own prepared ground and creates a line that cannot be erased casually. Black chalk allows a different softness. Red chalk offers warmth and range. These differences are not technical trivia. They shape the thought as it is recorded. The workshop is full of such quiet negotiations. A drawing tool encourages one kind of movement and resists another. The hand learns when to press, when to lift, and when to allow a line to remain pale. A quick notation and a carefully modelled study may begin with the same basic gesture, but they ask different things of the surface. Even the larger Anghiari cartoon depends upon paper's vulnerability. Joined sheets must hold together. The scale may be impressive, yet the support is not indestructible. Moisture, handling, dust, and flame all matter. The great civic design remains materially fragile, which makes the care surrounding it feel more intimate rather than less ambitious. Beyond the doorway, another footstep passes and fades. The sound reminds us that Florence continues outside, yet here, within the circle of remaining light, the work table feels like a small country of its own. Paper, wood, dust and tools are enough to hold our attention for a while longer, and near that table is Leonardo himself, not yet the legend made by later centuries, but a person nearing the end of another working day. It can be difficult to imagine Leonardo without the accumulated weight of his reputation. Later centuries have turned his name into shorthand for limitless curiosity. His paintings are approached through crowds and guarded rooms. His drawings are studied for signs of unusual insight. Even his incomplete projects seem to gather a special aura, because they remained unfinished in his hands. But the Leonardo of this evening does not know the future in that way. He's not standing inside his own legend. He's an artist in his early 50s, experienced and widely travelled, carrying the memory of earlier work and the uncertainty of present tasks. Florence is familiar to him, but it is not the same city he left in his younger years. He too has changed. Leonardo was born in 1452 in Vinci, a small town and surrounding landscape west of Florence. As a young man, he entered the orbit of Andrea del Verrocchio's workshop in Florence, a place known for activity across more than one medium. There he encountered a culture of painting, sculpture, metalwork, design, and close observation. Later he spent many years in Milan, where he served the court of Ludovico Sforza and pursued artistic, technical and ceremonial projects. By the time he returned to Florence around the turn of the century, he brought with him a long record of ambition, experiment, and unfinished work. Tonight, we do not need to decide whether he appears tired, restless, content, or distracted at any exact moment. No witness has preserved such a scene for us. It is enough to observe that his work habits seem to have allowed many subjects to coexist. A public commission could demand attention while a smaller sheet attracted a separate question. The mind did not divide itself neatly into artist on one day and investigator on another. Drawing helped connect the fields. Imagine him standing near the larger studies for the Anghiari project. His clothing belongs to his own time and circumstances, but there is no need to decorate the image excessively. Let the room remain calm. His hand may hold a drawing tool or rest briefly at the edge of the table. He looks at what is before him, then perhaps looks away. A pause is not an interruption of the work. It is part of the work. A person who observes carefully must also allow time for uncertainty. The line on the page may not yet correspond to the movement remembered or imagined. A horse turning under pressure is not merely a symbol of power. It is a body with weight, balance, muscle, and direction. A human face under strain is not simply an expression added afterward. It changes the arrangement of the whole head. To draw convincingly, Leonardo must keep returning to the visible world and to the memory of seeing it. This returning is one reason his pages can feel so alive. They rarely suggest a mind satisfied by the first answer. A question is opened, examined, and sometimes carried forward without resolution. Later viewers may admire the range, but the experience of living with that range may have felt less triumphant. Curiosity creates work. Every answer reveals another edge that deserves attention. Returning to Florence after years in Milan may also have sharpened the sense of being both familiar and changed. Leonardo knew the city from youth, yet he did not return as the same person who had left. He carried experience from courtly service, from major paintings, from engineering concerns, from festive designs, and from projects that had tested the distance between intention and completion. Florence could be home ground without being simple. At this stage of life, his working identity was broad enough that no single commission could contain it. The Anghiari project was substantial, but it did not erase other concerns. A portrait could continue slowly. A page might receive a water study. A question about air could remain nearby. The breadth should not be mistaken for effortless productivity. Maintaining several lines of attention can be demanding. Each asks to be remembered well enough that it can be resumed. The table, therefore, becomes a place of selection. What can be advanced tonight? What must wait for daylight? Which observation needs to be recorded before it fades? Which larger problem can be set aside without being lost? Experienced work often depends less on doing everything at once than on knowing how to leave the right trace for tomorrow. There is a gentle loneliness in that habit. Not sadness exactly, rather the solitude of noticing something that cannot be explained quickly. The room is quiet because a question needs quiet. Outside, the city moves according to errands, meals, bells, and closing doors. Inside, a small turn of ink may be asking how water changes shape after it strikes an obstacle, or how a bird adjusts itself against moving air. Leonardo's surviving notes sometimes appear crowded, compressed into available spaces, accompanied by diagrams that make the written lines feel almost secondary. His mirror writing, moving from right to left, has invited much speculation. It may relate in part to the practical ease of writing that way for a left-handed person. Whatever mixture of habit and convenience lay behind it, the reversed script gives later readers the impression of entering a private current of thought. But for Leonardo, it was not a theatrical code placed there for us. It was a working method. The person at the table is also a maker who has known disappointment. Large projects do not always become finished objects. Plans change. Patrons alter their priorities. Materials behave unpredictably. Time moves on. The unfinished quality of some of Leonardo's work is often discussed as evidence of relentless experimentation or shifting attention, but it can also be understood within the conditions of a demanding career. Artists depended on commissions, circumstance, travel, resources, and technical realities. Not every intention was given the chance to settle into completion, yet unfinished does not mean empty. A study can retain its value even when the larger project changes. A page can preserve the act of looking. The Anghiari commission itself will not become the lasting mural Florence imagined, but the studies connected with it still offer a vivid record of Leonardo's effort. The workroom contains time in this incomplete form, not a straight path toward a masterpiece, but a field of attempts. As evening deepens, the famous distance between Leonardo and ourselves becomes smaller. He is not a symbol for a moment. He is someone arranging another period of work before stopping for the night. He may set one page aside because it needs daylight. He may return to another because the lamplight is sufficient. He may leave a mark unfinished without knowing whether it will be resumed tomorrow or months from now. This ordinary uncertainty is comforting. We do not have to resolve every question before the day ends. The page can wait. The room can hold what has not yet found its final form, and Leonardo, for all the breadth of his attention, doesn't work in a world made only of solitary thought. Around the edges of the room are the traces of assistants, apprentices, suppliers, teachers, and earlier habits. To understand the workshop, we should let those quieter presences return. The image of Leonardo alone at a table is appealing, especially at this quiet hour. It allows the mind to settle into a simple scene. One lamp, one page, one attentive figure. Yet a Renaissance workshop was rarely the world of one person alone. Even when the room became still at the end of the day, it carried the marks of collaboration. To notice those marks is not to diminish Leonardo. It is to return him to the culture of making that shaped his life. A workshop could be a place of learning, employment, production, and practical problem-solving. Younger artists gained skill through observation and repetition. Assistants handled tasks that varied according to experience. Some work demanded confidence and judgment. Other work required patience rather than originality. Preparing surfaces, grinding pigments, cleaning brushes, moving materials, pricking or tracing designs for transfer, keeping tools in order, or assisting with the many stages that stood between an idea and a finished object. The boundaries between master and assistant were not always visible in the way modern viewers might expect. A painting associated with a workshop could include contributions from more than one hand. Attributions remain the subject of careful study, because collaboration was part of the system, rather than an exception to it. In Verrocchio's shop, where Leonardo learned as a young man, this shared structure would have been familiar. The National Gallery in London describes Tobias and the Angel as a work of Verrocchio's workshop. Other works connected with Verrocchio reveal the involvement of pupils and assistants through technical analysis. The workshop left room for instruction, division of labour, and the gradual recognition of individual skill. By the time of our Florentine evening, Leonardo was no longer the young apprentice watching an older master. He had assistants and associates of his own. We should be careful not to place a particular named person in the room on a particular evening, unless the evidence supports it, but it is entirely reasonable to imagine that the day's activity has included other hands. A large preparatory cartoon could not exist in a vacuum. Paper, supports, tools, and working surfaces needed attention. The room itself had to function. Perhaps an assistant has already gathered a few items from a bench. Perhaps another has carried away a container or left fresh material ready for tomorrow. A small task remained unfinished near the edge of the table because there was no need to rush it. The atmosphere is not that of a busy shop at midday. Most of the movement has passed. Still, the objects retain the order created by shared labour. This allows us to consider the value of repetition. The most restful tasks are often those that can be performed with steady hands and a known sequence. A pigment is ground until the texture is right. A surface is checked. A brush is cleaned carefully enough to serve again. A sheet is laid where it will not be damaged. A lamp is adjusted. These actions may not enter art history, but they make art possible. For an apprentice, the workshop day offered a long education in seeing how things are done. Instruction did not always require a formal lesson. It could arrive through proximity, watching the pressure of a hand, noticing the consistency of a mixture, understanding why one tool was chosen instead of another, or learning when not to disturb a process. Craft knowledge lived in the body as much as in words. Leonardo's own apprenticeship within Verrocchio's wide-ranging workshop mattered because it placed painting among other forms of skill. Verrocchio worked across sculpture, painting, goldsmithing, architecture and engineering. Drawings could connect one practice to another. A sculptor's concern for structure might sharpen the understanding of a painted body. Experience with metalwork might encourage precision. The workshop did not need to divide art from technique as cleanly as later categories sometimes do. In Leonardo's mature work, that early breadth remains visible. The same person who considers the softened transition of a face also thinks about water, weights, geometry, and the practical behaviour of materials. His curiosity may be unusually expansive, but it grew within a world where skilled making already crossed boundaries. The tools on the table are not props in the story of a solitary genius. They are the tools of a trained maker who has spent decades among other trained makers. It is helpful to pause over the quieter economy of the room. Paper costs something. Pigments cost something. Wood must be obtained. Oil, glue and cloth have uses beyond painting and must be bought, prepared and stored. A commission may sound elevated when described centuries later, but in the present tense it also involves accounts, schedules, quantities and delays. Great images are subject to ordinary logistics. This is especially true when the image is large. The Battle of Anghiari project demanded space for the cartoon, and eventually a wall in the Palazzo Vecchio. Drawings had to move from small studies toward a coordinated design. The process required more than imagination. It required surfaces large enough to receive the developing composition and a room capable of accommodating the work. There may have been scaffolding, supports and arrangements that changed according to the stage of preparation. Even the quietest planning carried physical weight. An assistant sweeping a small amount of debris from a floor participates indirectly in that scale. Another sharpening or organizing tools helps preserve the conditions in which thought can continue. The distinction between important and unimportant work becomes less sharp when we see how each stage depends on the next. The same is true in a painter's practice. The final visible layer may attract the eye, but it rests upon preparation hidden beneath it. A panel must be stable. A ground must be suited to the intended effect. A drawing guides the composition. Layers build gradually. A soft transition in a face may depend on the calm accumulation of decisions made over time. There is no single instant in which the whole painting suddenly arrives. As the room empties, the collaborative nature of the day remains as a kind of after-image. A bench does not speak, yet it suggests use. A folded cloth, a cleaned brush, or a paper placed safely aside hints that someone understood what would be needed tomorrow. The workshop becomes slightly lonely, only because it was not lonely earlier. This balance matters for the mood of our evening. Leonardo can remain private without becoming isolated from the world. He is part of a chain of learning and labour. He was taught, he worked beside others, he depended on others. Others depended on him. The room gathers all of that quietly after the footsteps fade. The network beyond the room is easy to overlook. Materials do not appear by themselves. Paper passes through merchants. Wood is cut, seasoned, transported, selected and worked. Pigments come from sources near and far, shaped by trade as well as craft. Oil, glue, cloth, cord, metal tools and containers each have their own routes into the workshop. The artist's table is connected quietly to many other forms of labour. A commission extends the network further. Civic officials, patrons, clerks, messengers, craftspeople and assistants may all enter the story at different stages. A payment has to be authorised. A room has to be assigned. Scaffolding or supports may need to be arranged. The practical record of Leonardo's keys to the Sala del Papa is useful partly because it brings the celebrated artist down to the level of administration. Access had to be granted before work could proceed. There is something reassuring about this. The workshop is not powered by inspiration alone. It depends upon lists, deliveries, schedules, and the willingness of people to complete ordinary responsibilities. The world behind a major image includes those who may never see their names associated with it. For the younger members of a workshop, these practical tasks were also a form of education. Carrying a panel teaches its weight. Preparing ground teaches patience. Grinding a pigment teaches the difference between too coarse and fine enough. Holding a large sheet in place teaches how vulnerable a project can be before it reaches a wall. Even cleaning reveals the materials that remain after work and the care required to begin again tomorrow. At the centre of the workspace, the large public commission waits. It has drawn many of these practical tasks together. The time has come to look more closely at the cartoon itself, not as a battlefield filled with noise, but as an extraordinary problem of movement laid out patiently on paper. The Battle of Anghiari is one of the most famous works by Leonardo that we cannot stand before in its intended form. Its absence has encouraged speculation for centuries. Preparatory drawings survive. Copies and later interpretations preserve aspects of the composition. Written accounts help us understand its reputation. Yet the mural itself, planned for the Palazzo Vecchio, did not become a stable, finished monument in the way Florence may once have hoped. Tonight, that incompleteness does not need to become a dramatic mystery. It can remain what much of Leonardo's working life asks us to accept: a record of effort without a final object capable of holding every part of the story. The commission belongs to Florence's civic world. Leonardo was asked to prepare an image connected with the Battle of Anghiari, a Florentine victory from 1440. The eventual mural was intended for the great council hall in the Palazzo Vecchio. The scale was public and ambitious. It placed the artist's work within a larger setting of memory, politics, and civic identity. But here in Santa Maria Novella, before the wall and before the technical challenges of execution, the task begins on paper. A cartoon had to organize the image at full scale. The word can sound light to modern ears, but the work was serious and physically demanding. The composition needed space. Smaller studies could examine individual problems, but eventually those problems had to be brought into relation. A figure could not be convincing only by itself. It had to contribute to the movement of the whole. Leonardo concentrated on a moment of compressed action, often known through later copies as the struggle for the standard. Horse and rider, gesture and expression, force and resistance all press into one another. It is not necessary to narrate the battle in detail. The sleep-friendly path lies elsewhere, in the problem of how an artist studies movement that will not remain still. A horse does not hold a pose simply because a painter needs time. Its weight shifts, its neck twists. The angle of the head changes the line of the body. A rider's action alters the balance beneath him. The animal's expression is not separate from its physical strain. To prepare an image with such density, Leonardo had to gather observation, memory, invention, and structural understanding. On one surviving sheet connected with the cartoon, study of heads and proportions share the page with the marks of process. Other drawings linked with the project preserve fragments of the larger concern. The surviving material makes the lost work feel both distant and near. We cannot recover the complete mural merely by wishing for it, but we can see the hand-testing pieces of the composition. Imagine the difference between a small study and a full-scale cartoon. At the table, a head may fit within a page. At the larger surface, the artist must move his whole body to work. The distance between the eye and the drawing changes. A mark that feels strong up close may weaken when seen from several steps away. A line that seems exaggerated nearby may become necessary within the larger arrangement. The room is not simply containing the drawing. The drawing is reshaping the experience of the room. This physical scale introduces a slow choreography. Leonardo steps nearer, he works, he moves back. An assistant may hold or shift something. A joined sheet must remain secure. The surface must be protected from damage. Progress occurs not only through moments of inspiration, but through repeated acts of alignment and inspection. There is something almost meditative in the attempt to capture a turning movement. The eye follows a curve. The curve leads to another. The pull of one figure is answered by the counterweight of another. A horse's head turns in a direction that gathers attention, while the bodies around it form a knot of intersecting energies. The subject may be intense, but the study of it requires calm. Leonardo had long been interested in horses. During his years in Milan, he worked on plans for a monumental equestrian sculpture honouring Francesco Sforza. The bronze cast was never realised, though drawings preserve the immense practical attention he gave to the project. The study of horses demanded knowledge of proportion, stance, muscle, balance, and temperament. By the time of the Anghiari commission, the animal was not simply an element inserted into a composition. It was a complex body worthy of prolonged observation. The Civic Commission also reminds us that Renaissance art could be bound to competition and expectation. Around the same period, Michelangelo was commissioned for a separate battle scene with the same hall. Later retellings often emphasize rivalry, and the contrast between the two artists is undeniably interesting. But in our quiet room, comparison can remain at a distance. Leonardo's immediate companion is not another artist's reputation. It is the next decision required by the surface before him. The future of the mural would prove uncertain. Accounts of Leonardo's attempt to work on the wall have prompted debate about technique and about how much was actually executed. The work did not survive as an intact mural. Later alterations in the hall further complicated the story. For our purposes, it is best not to force certainty into a place where scholars continue to examine the evidence. What matters tonight is the preparatory labour, securely rooted in the Florentine years and in the room we have entered. The cartoon itself would have represented a major achievement. Large preparatory drawings were valuable and admired. They could allow viewers and other artists to study an image in a form that preserved the energy of design. Even without the lasting mural, the effort mattered. It influenced how later generations imagined Leonardo's power as a draftsman. Yet the most peaceful way to understand the project is to return from reputation to paper. Large paper, certainly. Paper joined and supported, marked and reconsidered, a surface that invites patience, a surface vulnerable to moisture, handling, time, and circumstance. The famous Lost Battle begins as a series of quiet contacts between tool and sheet. The lamp does not illuminate the entire cartoon evenly. Some parts fall into softness. Perhaps that is appropriate. We do not need to grasp every figure tonight. We can let the wider composition rest against the wall while our attention returns to the table. There, beside the demands of a public mural, another kind of work may be waiting in the same Florentine period. It is smaller, more private in scale, and now more famous than anyone in the room could have imagined. A portrait begun around these years, the painting we know as the Mona Lisa. The transition from the Anghiari cartoon to the Mona Lisa is a transition from one kind of scale to another. On one side is the broad Civic Commission, designed to carry motion across a public wall. On the other is a portrait painted on a poplar panel, intimate enough for the eye to approach a face gradually. The two works do not need to be placed physically beside one another in the Sala del Papa. We cannot say that the portrait stood in this room on the evening we imagine, but it belongs to Leonardo's Florentine years and offers a quieter way to understand his practice. The Louvre identifies the painting as the portrait of Lisa Gherardini, wife of Francesco del Giocondo, known as the Mona Lisa. It dates the work broadly from 1503 to 1519, a range that reminds us how long Leonardo could remain engaged with a painting. Rather than imagining a single sitting followed by a swift completion, it is more fitting to think of a work developing over time. The portrait became something Leonardo carried with him and continued to refine. To later viewers, the painting arrives already surrounded by fame. The smile has been discussed endlessly. The sitter's identity has been examined, debated, and repeated. The landscape has become familiar even to people who have never seen the original panel. But in the world of Leonardo's workshop, the painting is not yet an icon. It is a surface still being considered. The panel asks for slowness. A portrait depends on more than resemblance. It depends on the relation between figure and space, on the calm placement of hands, on the direction of the body, on the way the sitter turns toward the viewer, and on the softened boundaries that prevent the face from feeling cut out against the air. The Louvre describes the sfumato technique as a misty haze around the figure. The effect is not a trick performed all at once. It emerges through subtle transitions and careful layers. Imagine the patience required to work near the edge of a mouth without making the expression too fixed. A sharply stated line could settle the face too firmly. A softer transition allows ambiguity to remain alive. The viewer does not receive a simple answer. The face seems to change slightly according to attention, distance, and light. This quality fits our evening. As the room darkens, certainty softens. The objects nearest the lamp remain clearer than those farther away. The city beyond the walls loses definition. A face, too, can exist through gradual passage rather than hard division. Leonardo's interest in how forms emerge through light and shadow becomes not merely an artistic method, but a way of attending to the world. The sitter's clothing and posture contribute to the same restraint. The portrait does not depend upon a display of elaborate accessories. The hands rest with composure. The body turns in relation to the viewer without appearing stiffly arranged. The figure seems present rather than merely posed. This presence is part of what later audiences respond to, even when they approach the painting through layers of modern fame. The poplar panel is relatively modest in scale. Its dimensions are far removed from the monumental wall imagined for the Battle of Anghiari. Yet the smaller surface does not reduce the demand placed upon the artist. It concentrates it. A slight change around the mouth or eyes alters the entire impression. A transition in shadow affects whether the face feels fixed or alive. On a portrait, delicacy can become its own form of difficulty. The work also encourages a different kind of duration. A public mural is tied to a site and commission. A portable portrait can travel with the painter. It can be reconsidered after the immediate circumstances of its beginning have changed. Leonardo's decision to retain and continue working on the Mona Lisa over the years is one reason the painting feels less like a completed transaction and more like a long companionship between artist and surface. The landscape behind the sitter adds another quiet movement. Roads, water, rock, and atmospheric distance open beyond the still figure. The background does not behave like a simple view through a window. It has an imaginative, almost dreamlike quality, grounded in Leonardo's study of nature yet rearranged into an environment that feels both possible and elusive. The portrait holds stillness in the foreground and change in the distance. Water belongs there, even when it is not the first thing noticed. Leonardo's attention to currents, erosion, and the shaping of land gives the background a deeper relation to his other studies. The world behind the sitter seems to have been formed over time. It is not a decorative screen. It suggests processes continuing beyond the human scale of a single life. The painting also reminds us that a workshop is not limited to one tempo. The Anghiari cartoon may require large movements across joined sheets. A portrait invites concentration within a small area. A notebook may receive a quick sketch. A panel may wait between layers. Different works ask the artist to inhabit different forms of patience. There's no need to imagine Leonardo working on the Mona Lisa every evening. A painting can remain present in a career even while it's not actively touched. It can return to mind. A problem in one work may quietly inform another. The study of shadow, atmosphere, gesture, or water does not stay sealed within its original category. Leonardo's practices meet because the same observer carries them. Perhaps this is why the portrait remains a helpful companion to our workshop visit. It is famous, but it resists haste. A hurried glance recognizes the face and moves on. A slower glance begins to notice how little is stated harshly. The hands are composed without strain. The veil is delicate. The transitions around the cheeks and mouth seem to breathe. The landscape recedes through atmosphere. Even the sitter's turn creates the sense of a moment continuing rather than a pose frozen unnaturally in place. We can imagine the portrait somewhere within Leonardo's larger Florentine life. Not necessarily in the room tonight, but near enough in time to shape our understanding of him. While one commission asks for conflict and concentrated movement, another work asks for poise. While one surface must be read from a distance, another rewards nearness. While the public image is tied to civic memory, the portrait carries the presence of one individual into a longer future. That future would have surprised everyone involved. The panel would travel far beyond Florence. The sitter's face would become one of the most recognizable images in the world. Yet fame is the least restful way to approach it. Better to return to the beginning. A poplar panel, a patient hand, a face emerging through layers, and a painter willing to leave the work open to further refinement. The lamp beside us flickers gently. The imagined portrait recedes from the room, not because it has disappeared, but because another kind of surface asks for attention. On the work table, a small page lies ready. It does not carry the weight of public expectation or the fame of a painted face. It offers something more private, notes, sketches, and the daily habit of noticing. A notebook changes the scale of the evening again. It does not ask for the physical sweep of the Anghiari cartoon or the layered attention of a portrait panel. It can fit near the hand. It can travel. It can receive a question before the question has been made orderly. This immediacy makes Leonardo's notebooks some of the most intimate things he left behind. The Victoria and Albert Museum holds the Codex Forster notebooks and describes pages filled with sketches, diagrams and notes written in Leonardo's characteristic mirror writing, moving from right to left. The subjects range widely. The surviving books do not behave like finished treatises arranged for a modern reader. They feel active, provisional, and alive with use. A page may gather concerns that later categories would separate. Mirror writing has drawn speculation because it looks mysterious to anyone accustomed to reading in the opposite direction. But it is important not to turn a practical habit into a secret code merely because it appears unusual. Leonardo was left-handed, and writing from right to left may have been comfortable and may have helped avoid smudging fresh ink. Whatever the full explanation, the habit belonged naturally to his working process. The words were notes to think with, not puzzles designed for later admirers. A small notebook allows thought to remain close to observation. A question can be recorded while its edges are still rough. Something seen outdoors may return to the page indoors. A diagram can test a relationship without needing to become beautiful. A few words can preserve an intention. Look again, measure, compare, ask someone, find a book, watch the movement more carefully. There is a comforting modesty in this. The notebook does not demand that every entry become a discovery. Some notes are reminders, some are partial, some are difficult to interpret without context. Some diagrams lead toward projects that were never completed. The page is useful because it can hold unfinished attention without embarrassment. Imagine one lying open within the circle of lamplight. The paper is not a blank stage. Marks already occupy much of the surface. A line of writing turns across one area. A small figure appears nearby. An arrow or curve links one observation to another. Space is used economically. The page feels less like a polished composition and more like a field where thought has passed several times. Leonardo's drawings are central to understanding him because they link looking to thinking. The Royal Collection emphasizes that many of its Leonardo drawings are not directly connected to paintings or other finished artistic projects. They record attempts to understand the world's variety. This matters. Drawing is not merely preparation for something more important. It is itself a method of inquiry. A drawn line can isolate a movement that the eye might otherwise lose. A spiral helps the mind remain with the behavior of water. A wing can be examined as a structure rather than as a blur passing overhead. A profile can be measured. A machine can be considered in parts before anyone attempts to build it. The act of drawing slows perception enough for relationships to emerge. The notebook also reveals a mind willing to move sideways. Modern readers often want a clean sequence. First the artist studies one subject, then finishes, then begins another. Leonardo's pages rarely cooperate with that desire. Water may appear near geometry. A mechanical idea may interrupt another concern. Notes on painting can sit within a broader field of observations. The movement is not random, but it is not always linear. This makes the pages particularly suitable for a quiet evening. Sleep does not always arrive by following a straight line either. The mind drifts. One thought touches another and then loosens its hold. A familiar sound brings back an image. An unfinished question settles into the background. The notebook allows us to wander without needing to arrive anywhere quickly. Let us linger over the physical act of writing. The pen is dipped, excess ink is controlled. The hand moves from right to left with a practiced rhythm. A word is abbreviated or crowded into a remaining space. The pen pauses, a diagram begins. Perhaps the page is turned. Perhaps the notebook is rotated because a new drawing fits better at another angle. The object is used freely rather than displayed ceremonially. Some pages are dense. Others allow more room. The variation has its own pulse. A busy page suggests a thought pursued rapidly. A quieter page leaves the paper visible around the marks. Both belong to the same habit of attention. It is easy to project modern categories onto Leonardo and call him a scientist, engineer, artist, inventor, anatomist, or natural philosopher, according to the page in front of us. Each word can be useful within limits, yet the notebook often asks us to see the connections rather than the labels. The study of painting requires knowledge of light, form, expression, atmosphere, and material. The study of water touches landscape, engineering, movement, and analogy. The study of flight turns toward birds, air, weight, structure, and mechanics. The notebook is where these connections can remain flexible. Nothing has to be defended as a complete system before it is allowed to appear. A page can hold possibility. That does not mean every possibility is realized. Many of Leonardo's technical designs were never built in his lifetime, and some were exploratory rather than practical plans awaiting construction. The notebook should not be read as a catalogue of modern machines hidden in the past. It is more interesting than that. It shows a person testing the limits of what could be observed, represented and imagined with the knowledge and materials available to him. In the room tonight, the little book may be among the least imposing objects and one of the most revealing. It can be closed with one hand. It can be placed beside another page. It does not insist on completion. It accepts the day's remainder. It is also helpful to remember what the notebooks are not. They are not diaries in the modern sense, offering a steady personal confession from one day to the next. They are not a single encyclopedia assembled neatly for publication. The surviving volumes and loose sheets have complicated histories. Pages were used at different times, and later binding can bring together material that did not originate as one continuous sequence. When we lean over one imagined notebook tonight, we are entering a practice rather than opening a perfectly ordered book. This makes the pages more restful, not less. They do not insist on a complete system. They invite attention in portions. One page can be approached for the shape of its marks before every word is understood. A small diagram has value even when the larger project remains uncertain. A note may function as a prompt rather than an explanation. The physical size of a notebook matters too. A portable volume can accompany observation beyond the workroom. It can be carried, turned, opened briefly, and used without ceremony. The relationship between page and body differs from the relationship demanded by the full-scale cartoon. One requires walking backward to judge the whole. The other draws the shoulders inward and gathers attention close to the hand. In that small space, writing and drawing live beside each other without needing separate territories. A diagram interrupts a sentence. A sentence bends around an image. A margin receives another thought. The page becomes a landscape of priorities changing in real time. Leonardo may return later and add a further mark, but he does not have to make the surface tidy for us. The intimacy comes partly from that lack of performance. The notebook was useful before it was admired. Its task was to preserve enough of a question that the question could be found again. A line curves across the paper. It could belong to water. It could begin as the edge of a form and become something else. We follow it gently as it leads us outward from the workshop and toward the river that has accompanied Florence all evening, the Arno moving through the city and through Leonardo's attention. Water is one of the most restful subjects in Leonardo's work, though he did not treat it only as a source of calm. He studied its force, its patterns, its capacity to shape land, and its practical importance to cities and landscapes. To look at his water drawings is to see movement disciplined by attention. A current becomes a family of lines. A disturbance opens into curls, eddies, and returning paths. Florence gave Leonardo a river close at hand. The Arno moved through the city's life and through the surrounding valley. During his second Florentine period, Leonardo studied the hydrography of Florence and the Arno Valley. He considered ambitious ideas for changing or canalizing part of the river's course. Proposals connected with navigation and broader practical aims. These were not simple projects completed as drawn. They belonged to the field of planning, possibility, geography and engineering thought. Tonight, we do not need to follow every canal proposal across a map. It is enough to understand why the river would hold his attention. Water is never entirely still, even when it appears peaceful from a distance. It responds to banks, stones, channels, falls, weather, and obstacles. It can be watched at a bridge, along a shore, after rain, or where one flow meets another. Each encounter offers a new variation on the same underlying question. How does movement organize itself? Imagine Leonardo near the Arno earlier in the day, not necessarily on this exact date, but as part of his broader habit of looking. The river carries reflected light in broken pieces. Near an obstruction, the surface changes. A smooth passage becomes turbulent. Small circles form and dissolve. A line of foam may reveal a current more clearly than the water itself. What the eye notices briefly can be returned to later on paper. Within the workshop, the river changes medium. It becomes pen and ink, perhaps chalk, a set of lines drawn closely enough to suggest force without imitating every droplet. The page cannot move, yet the marks create movement in the mind. A whirlpool turns, a cascade falls, waveforms repeat and vary. The drawing is descriptive, but it is also analytical. It asks the viewer to see structure inside change. The Royal Collection preserves later sheets in which Leonardo examined falling water, wave patterns, and currents in red chalk, black chalk, pen and ink. Some date after the Florentine evening we're imagining, so we should not place those exact sheets on tonight's table. But they help us understand the continuity of the subject. Water remained with him. The questions deepened rather than disappearing. There is a pleasure in allowing that continuity to shape the narration. The water near Florence moves beyond our room and beyond our chosen year. It travels through Leonardo's later pages. It links observation to landscape and engineering to drawing. It becomes a subject that can be revisited without becoming the same each time. Water is also a teacher of patience because it cannot be understood by a single glance. A river viewed from a bridge gives one impression. A close look near a bank gives another. A falling stream behaves differently from a wide current. A vessel being filled, a channel narrowing, rain passing over earth, and a small pool disturbed by a dropped object, each reveal another aspect of the same element. Leonardo often thought through analogy. Patterns in one part of nature could suggest patterns elsewhere. Water, air, hair, branching forms, and the movement of currents invited comparison. The analogies were not all equivalent in a modern scientific sense, but they demonstrate his desire to connect visible processes. The world did not appear as a set of unrelated objects. It offered recurring structures that could be examined and drawn. This is where the quiet workroom becomes wider than its walls. A page on the table contains a landscape. A few lines return us to the river. The dim room holds sunlight remembered from another hour, the pale reflection of sky, and the sound of water moving beyond stone embankments. The Arno itself belonged to Florence's practical future, as well as its scenery. A proposal to alter its course involved geography, labour, commerce, and power. Leonardo's ideas were expansive enough to exceed what could easily be accomplished. The scale reminds us that his notebooks could contain both minute observation and enormous intention. One moment follows an eddy. Another considers a canal across the landscape. Yet the smaller observation remains the foundation. Without looking closely, the broad plan becomes empty. Leonardo's pages keep bringing thought back toward visible behaviour. How does water pass through an opening? What happens when it strikes a surface? How does the current turn? What line best records the motion? The Arno also invites Leonardo to think as a map maker. To study a valley is to change one's distance from it. At the river bank, the current occupies the senses directly. From a higher viewpoint or on a mapped page, the same river becomes a line crossing terrain, turning around settlements, receiving tributaries, and connecting places through distance. The local eddy and the broader landscape are not separate subjects. They are two scales of one problem. Leonardo produced maps and landscape studies with an attention that can feel remarkably fresh to a modern eye. A map is a practical object, but it is also an act of imagination disciplined by measurement. The person drawing it must hold a wide territory within a smaller surface. Hills, roads, waterways, towns, and directions must be made legible without pretending that the page is the land itself. For river planning, this shift of scale is essential. A proposed canal or alteration to the Arno would not be only a line drawn confidently through empty space. The landscape has gradients, soils, distances, existing uses and settlements. Labour would have to be organised. Water would have to be persuaded to move according to conditions that cannot be wished away. The ambition can be enormous while the first work remains modest. Observe, measure, compare, draw. This combination of broad plan and minute attention is one of Leonardo's recurring habits. He can look at a current twisting behind a stone and also consider the route of a river across a valley. The page allows the two scales to answer one another. The drawn eddy reminds the planner that water has its own behaviour. The map reminds the observer that a small current participates in a much larger system. For our evening, the mapped river adds a quiet spaciousness. The workroom is enclosed, but the page opens outward. Somewhere beyond the walls are fields, bends in the river, bridges, mills, banks, roads, and places where water changes direction. Florence is one point within a living landscape, rather than an isolated collection of buildings. At the table, the pen traces one curve and then another. The marks are not hurried. Even where they seem energetic, they are controlled by the effort to understand. A drawn vortex becomes a quiet companion to the lamp flame. Both move, though in different ways. Both respond to the air around them. Both create patterns that cannot be held still for long. A river observed at different hours becomes almost a different object each time. In the morning, the surface may carry a pale reflection of sky. In stronger daylight, movement becomes easier to separate into smaller patterns. By evening, the water grows harder to read, and only certain lines catch the remaining light. The current has not become less active. The eye has simply lost some of its certainty. That changing visibility may have appealed to a painter as much as to an engineer. Light reveals structure, then conceals it again. A curve appears near the bank and disappears beneath a darker stretch. A reflection breaks when the surface shifts. The observer must hold the pattern in memory long enough to return to paper. Inside the workshop, the drawn river has one advantage over the real one. It can be paused. The eye can revisit the bend of a line without waiting for the same movement to happen twice. But the drawing also admits its limit. It cannot carry the sound, weight, coldness, or endless variation of water itself. The page becomes a useful reduction rather than a replacement. This balance between attention and humility runs through Leonardo's studies. Drawing allows the mind to grasp more, yet the world always remains larger than the drawing. There will be another current, another eddy, another change in light. The river continues teaching because it never repeats itself perfectly. For a listener settling towards sleep, water can be allowed to do what it has always done. It can carry away the sharper edges of the day. The current does not erase the world. It simply keeps moving. A concern that seemed fixed loosens slightly. A thought circles and passes. The river continues beneath the bridges while Florence grows quiet. Leonardo's study of water leads naturally toward another invisible medium, air. Air also moves around bodies, though its motion is harder to see. Birds reveal it through their wings. A feather, a turn, a glide, and a change in balance make the invisible briefly legible. On another page, Leonardo follows that lesson upward. Air is more difficult to draw than water. A current in a river may reveal itself through foam, reflection, and the visible turning of the surface. Air often remains unseen until something moves within it. A scrap of cloth stirs. Smoke bends away from a flame. Leaves tremble. Most clearly of all, a bird rises, glides, adjusts one wing, and makes the invisible world around its body briefly understandable. Leonardo's interest in flight belongs naturally beside his study of water. Both subjects ask how a body moves through a medium. Both reward observation of curves, resistance, pressure, and balance. Both lead from the smallest visible detail toward larger questions. On the page, the path from river current to bird wing is not as strange as it first appears. In the Florence years around our imagined evening, flight occupied Leonardo's attention with particular intensity. Surviving notes and drawings examine birds, wings, air currents, and mechanical possibilities. The codex on the flight of birds is commonly dated to around 1505. Its pages show that Leonardo did not think only of copying the shape of a wing. He was interested in the relationship between weight, lift, movement, and the behavior of air. He watched nature as a teacher, but not as a teacher who offered easy lessons. A bird's flight looks effortless only from a distance. Up close, it is a sequence of decisions made by the body. The angle of a feather matters. The wing changes shape through the stroke. The tail helps guide direction. Wind alters the available paths. A bird does not simply defeat gravity once and remain free of it. It negotiates continuously with the air. Imagine Leonardo pausing outdoors during daylight to watch that negotiation. Perhaps a bird circles above a roof line or passes over open ground outside the denser streets. There is no need to assign a species with certainty. What matters is the habit of attention. He looks for the moment when active flapping gives way to gliding. He notices how a bird turns without falling. He considers whether a body might remain aloft through an intelligent use of currents rather than through force alone. Later, indoors, the observation changes form. A wing appears on paper. It may be drawn as a natural structure, with the order of bones and feathers considered carefully. It may also encourage a mechanical design. Lines extend, hinges appear, surfaces broaden, and a question enters the workshop. Can a human-made device learn anything useful from the living body? It is easy for modern imagination to hurry ahead and turn every flight study into a direct ancestor of a modern aircraft. That approach can flatten the historical interest of the pages. Leonardo was working within the possibilities and limitations of his own time. Some designs explore ideas rather than offer practical machines ready for successful use. Human-powered flight presents immense difficulties. Materials, weight, control, and the available understanding of aerodynamics all place constraints on the dream. The value of the studies lies not in pretending those constraints had already been overcome, but in watching a serious mind approach them. The pages allow wonder and limitation to exist together. That balance is gentle. A person can study something that may remain beyond reach. A question is not wasted merely because it is not resolved immediately. The bird still teaches. The drawing still sharpens perception. The attempt to understand air makes the world larger, even when the workshop door closes before any machine leaves the ground. There is a later tradition associating Leonardo's flight studies with Monte Seceri, a hill near Florence. Some accounts imagine an attempt there, perhaps involving an assistant. The evidence does not allow us to treat a dramatic test flight as settled fact. It is better to let the possibility remain uncertain. Leonardo certainly studied flight. He certainly considered how a human being might learn from birds. Whether a specific experiment unfolded as later stories suggest is another matter. This restraint does not make the subject less interesting. It makes the notebook more human. The page is not a prophecy delivered with perfect knowledge. It is a place where curiosity takes form under real conditions. The lines carry both hope and difficulty. The contrast between flapping and gliding is especially suggestive. A bird can spend energy beating its wings, then enter a stretch of air where a different kind of control becomes possible. The body does not become passive. It remains responsive, adjusting angle and balance in ways that may be difficult for an observer on the ground to follow. The visible stillness of a glide contains many subtle corrections. Leonardo's interest in air currents encouraged him to study not only the shape of a device, but the conditions around it. Wind is not simply an obstacle, it can carry. Rising air, direction, and changing pressure affect what a wing can do. The dream of flight therefore becomes partly a dream of learning how not to fight the air unnecessarily. This is a gentle idea to keep near us at night. Effort has its place, but so does the search for a current that can bear some of the weight. The bird does not remain aloft by tension alone. It yields and adjusts. Its control is active without being rigid. On paper, the lesson may become a note, a curve, a proportion, or a mechanical question. A design inspired by wings does not automatically become a successful flying machine, but the observation remains valuable even when the construction cannot yet solve every difficulty. Looking closely has already changed the quality of the question. Within the lamplit room, a wing study would have a quiet beauty of its own. The feathered surface can be understood as many smaller surfaces cooperating. The bones establish structure, the joints permit change. The arrangement is not ornamental. Each part serves movement. Leonardo's artist's eye and mechanical eye do not compete here. They meet in the effort to describe a living form accurately enough that its function becomes clearer. This meeting of beauty and function was familiar from other areas of his work. A horse is visually compelling because its structure is alive in its movement. A river pattern is beautiful because the lines reveal force. A human face becomes expressive through minute physical transitions. Leonardo's pages rarely ask us to choose between appearance and explanation. They suggest that careful looking can lead toward both. Air enters the room in smaller ways too. The flame of the lamp responds to a draft. A shutter does not fit perfectly. The air nearest a wall may feel cooler. The movement is minor, but it belongs to the same world as the bird above Florence. The invisible medium is never truly absent. It presses, carries, resists, and changes. Imagine a sheet turned slightly so that a drawn wing falls within the best available light. The page may include a note written in reverse, a measurement, or a diagram showing the direction of motion. The hand pauses because the problem is not decorative. How should the wing incline? How does the air answer? What part of the movement can be carried by muscle, and what part by the current already present in the sky? The roofs of Florence offer their own small theatre of movement. During daylight, swallows and other birds may cross between open air and the shelter of buildings, appearing briefly against a pale sky before vanishing behind stone. From the street, a person sees only fragments of their path. The bird turns a corner in the air and is gone. Yet even a fragment can teach something if the observer has learned how to wait for it. Waiting matters because no single flight contains the whole lesson. One bird rises sharply, another glides, a third uses a current near a wall or adjusts its tail before landing. The eye gathers these moments over time and the hand brings them together later. Observation becomes cumulative. The page does not need to copy one perfect event. It can preserve a pattern learned from many brief encounters. This is another way Leonardo's work remains grounded in ordinary life. The sky above Florence is not an abstract laboratory. It is part of the city people cross beneath every day. Birds pass over errands, workshops, courtyards, gardens, and roofs. Most movements are noticed only for a moment, if at all. Leonardo's gift is not that the world performs differently for him. It is that he continues looking after the first glance would have been enough for someone else. There is no rush to answer. Outside, a real bird may already have found a resting place beneath a roof edge or in the shelter of a tree. The day's flights are ending. The sky over Florence darkens from pale blue toward a deeper shade that the room cannot hold for long. The observer turns from the window back to paper. Flight also gives the evening a gentle upward movement after the inward focus of the notebook. Our attention has travelled from a table to the river, and now toward the air above the city. Yet it returns again to the physical workshop. The wing study is made from paper and marks. A mechanical idea depends on hinges, cords, wood, fabric, and weight. Even a dream of leaving the ground must be negotiated with materials. This is a useful reminder that Leonardo's work does not divide cleanly into imagination on one side and craft on the other. The dream is shaped by what can be built. The painting is shaped by the panel and pigment. The drawing is shaped by the tool. A brilliant idea still meets the grain of wood, the absorbency of paper, the drying of oil, and the pressure of a hand. So we let the birds settle beyond the roofs. We let the air remain quietly around us, and we turn toward the slow craft of making, the prepared surfaces, brushes, pigments, and thin layers through which an image becomes visible over time. A painting begins long before the first recognizable feature appears. It begins with decisions that may seem almost invisible when the finished work is admired. The selection of a support, the preparation of a surface, the gathering of materials, the mixing of colour, and the understanding that one layer must often wait for another. The workshop at evening is a good place to notice these quiet beginnings. Famous images tend to make preparation disappear. We look at a face or a landscape and think first of vision. But the vision depends on matter. Paint must adhere. A panel must remain suitable for work. A brush must carry a controlled amount. A glaze must be thin enough to modify what lies beneath without obscuring it. For a panel painting in Florence, wood was a living material in more than one sense. It had grown, been cut, seasoned, joined, shaped, and prepared. Poplar was commonly used in Italian painting, and the Mona Lisa itself is painted on a poplar panel. A wooden support is not a neutral surface. It responds to changes in humidity and environment. It carries grain and structure. Before it can receive the subtle work of a portrait, it must be treated with care. The preparation of a panel involves stages. The surface could be covered with layers of ground, often involving gesso, to create a smoother field for drawing and paint. The details varied by purpose, place, and technique, and we should avoid inventing an exact recipe for a specific evening. What matters is the rhythm. Apply, allow to settle, smooth, inspect, and continue. The panel becomes ready through accumulated labour. This slow preparation suits the mood of the room. A surface is not forced into readiness. it is brought there gradually. Someone may have performed part of this work earlier in the day or in another workshop space. An assistant could participate. The final painterly effect depends upon tasks that do not carry a signature. Pigments also arrive from the material world. Colour is not a menu selected instantly. It may come from minerals, earths, plants, or processed materials. Some pigments are readily available. Others are expensive or demanding. Each behaves differently. Grinding pigment requires time and judgment. The particles must be brought toward a suitable consistency and combined with a binder appropriate to the intended use. The workshop would contain knowledge that is practical, inherited and adapted through experience. How does a pigment change when mixed? How opaque is it? How transparent? How does it dry? Does it remain stable? What happens when it is layered over another colour? The questions are quiet but important. A painter learns not only to see colour but to anticipate its behaviour. Brushes introduce another scale of care. A broad area and a delicate transition require different handling. A brush can leave evidence of the hand or soften it. It can place a precise mark or draw a thin veil across an earlier layer. The pressure, angle and amount of paint matter. Leonardo's reputation for subtle modelling is inseparable from this control. Oil painting allowed possibilities that differed from the quicker clarity associated with tempera. Florence in Leonardo's youth had a strong tempera tradition, while oil techniques became increasingly important in Italian painting. Leonardo explored what oil could do, including the gradual modulation of light and shadow. Yet oils also introduced their own demands. Layers dry at their own pace. Technical ambition meets material patience. Consider the face of the Mona Lisa again, not as an icon but as a surface under construction. The soft transitions around the eyes and mouth are not formed by a heavy outline. They emerge from delicate changes of tone. Sfumato is often described through smoke or haze. The term evokes the way boundaries become almost imperceptible. A cheek turns into shadow. A smile resists being pinned to a single line. The viewer senses movement within stillness. Such an effect rewards repeated attention. A thin layer alters what came before. Another adjusts the transition. The painter steps back. The surface rests. Time becomes part of the technique. This patience is not passive. It asks for restraint. The artist must know when an additional mark would clarify and when it would flatten. A panel can be overworked. A transition can become too explicit. The desire to improve something may need to be held back until the next day, when natural light returns and the eye is fresher. In the lamplit workshop, this judgment matters. Evening light is useful for some tasks and less useful for others. The flame creates warmth and local focus, but it changes the appearance of colour. Fine decisions about a portrait may be better postponed. A drawing can continue. Tools can be ordered. Notes can be made. The day does not end merely because one kind of work should pause. It changes its emphasis. This changing emphasis gives the workshop a varied rhythm. One person grinds a pigment, another prepares a support, another studies a transfer. Leonardo draws. A panel waits. An earlier layer dries. A fresh idea enters a notebook rather than the painting because the painting is not ready to receive it. The work advances through several quiet streams at once. Before paint reaches a panel, drawing can guide the image in several ways. An artist may establish the composition through an underdrawing, sometimes using light marks that later layers partially conceal. For larger designs, transfer becomes a practical challenge. A drawing can be pricked along important lines so that pigment or charcoal dust passed through the small holes leaves a guide on the receiving surface. Other methods can also be used according to the project. The exact procedure for every stage in Leonardo's work should not be assumed, but the broader principle is important. The image often travels through intermediate forms before it becomes visible in paint. This travel leaves hidden histories. Beneath a finished face may lie a structure the viewer cannot easily see. Beneath a drapery fold may be an earlier placement. A hand may have shifted. A contour may have softened. Technical examination of Renaissance painting sometimes reveals these adjustments, reminding us that the final image is not the record of one unbroken decision. It is the uppermost layer of a conversation with the surface. For an apprentice, copying and transfer could also train perception. Following a line accurately is not the same as inventing it, but it teaches discipline. Repeated curves educate the hand. Proportions become less abstract when they must be carried from one surface to another. The workshop develops skill through stages that may appear humble in isolation. Colour introduces another hidden history. A small quantity may be tested before it is trusted. A mixture that appears right while wet may change as it dries. A transparent layer modifies the tone beneath it. Light enters the painted surface, meets several layers, and returns to the eye altered. The effect can feel atmospheric, yet it is built through physical decisions. The painter therefore works with time as one of the materials. Some changes appear immediately. Others emerge only after drying. Some decisions are better made in daylight. Others can wait while attention turns to drawing or preparation. The room remains productive even when a panel is left untouched. The preparation of the Anghiari mural would present a different and much larger technical problem. A wall is not a panel. A monumental public painting requires understanding of the architectural surface, scale, transfer, scaffolding, and the behaviour of the chosen technique. Leonardo's earlier Last Supper in Milan had already shown both his ambition and the risks of experimentation on a wall. For the Florentine mural, the technical story remains complex and debated. Accounts suggest difficulty with his method, and scholars continue to examine how much was carried out. It is safest to keep our attention on the principle. Materials are not merely servants of ideas. They answer back. A surface can reject a plan. A mixture can behave differently at large scale than it did in a test. Drying conditions matter. Gravity matters. The wall has its own terms. This reality prevents our evening from becoming too dreamy. Leonardo's imagination was expansive, but the workshop was a place of contact with limits. A machine cannot ignore weight. A wing cannot ignore air. A canal cannot ignore geography and labour. A painted layer cannot ignore the surface beneath it. The world is interesting partly because it resists simplification. The materials near us therefore deserve their own quiet dignity. A stone used for grinding may have a worn surface created by repetition. A container may carry a trace of colour along its edge. A cloth has darkened through use. A knife or spatula reflects a small amount of lamplight. Brushes stand or lie where they will not be damaged. A prepared panel waits more silently than any notebook, holding nothing visible yet containing the possibility of an image. We can imagine the sound of grinding earlier in the day, steady, textured, neither loud nor delicate. Now it has stopped. The room retains only the result. Colour has been prepared. A task is ready for morning. The smell of oil is faint but present. So is the dry mineral quality of chalk and pigment. The scents do not need to be romanticized. They are part of work. The room is inhabited by substances before it is inhabited by masterpieces. Leonardo's attention to materials may also have deepened his observation of nature. The painter who studies how light crosses a face becomes attentive to atmosphere. The maker who watches liquids spread or settle gains another way to consider fluids. The draftsman who understands the resistance of a tool knows that every record of seeing is shaped by the medium used to record it. This is one reason the workshop feels coherent even though Leonardo's interests range so widely. The subjects meet through the hand. Water, wing, face, horse and machine arrive on paper through marks. A portrait arrives through prepared wood and layered paint. A public mural must meet a wall. Thought becomes physical before it can be shared. Near the end of the day, the physical world asks for care in return. Brushes should not be abandoned carelessly. Containers should be closed. Papers should be protected from flame, moisture and damage. A panel should rest where it will be safe. These habits are not separate from art. They are the final movements of the day's work. Before the room closes, one more memory deserves to enter. The mature Leonardo learned these rhythms over many years. Some began in Florence when he was young, in the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio. If we allow the evening to turn gently backward, the table before us can lead toward an earlier table, another master, and the apprenticeship that helped shape Leonardo's understanding of craft. As the lamp burns lower, the workshop in Santa Maria Novella becomes a place where different times can quietly overlap. The large Anghiari commission belongs to Leonardo's present. The portrait begun around these years opens toward a long future. The notebooks gather observations from day to day, and beneath all of this lies the memory of apprenticeship. The years when Leonardo was not yet the master, whose name would gather so much attention, but a young person learning within the busy workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio. Verrocchio was one of the most versatile artists in 15th century Florence. He worked across sculpture, painting, goldsmithing, architecture, and engineering. The National Gallery of Art describes the connections among these media as central to understanding his workshop. Drawing helped move thought between them. A study for a sculpture could sharpen a painter's sense of volume. Experience in metalwork encouraged precision. The demands of casting, carving, painting, and design each trained the eye differently. For a young Leonardo, such a workshop offered more than instruction in how to paint a face or drape a garment. It provided an environment in which materials and ideas were constantly crossing paths. A work might begin as a drawing and become a sculpture. A painted figure might benefit from the structural understanding learned through modelling. A decorative object might require geometry, patience, and close control of tools. The boundaries between artist, designer, and skilled maker were porous. The workshop day would have been busy in ways that our late evening only remembers indirectly. Younger assistants and apprentices carried out practical tasks, watched more experienced hands, and learned through repetition. Commissioned objects passed through stages. Patrons expected results. Materials arrived and had to be managed. The floor, benches, and storage areas carried the untidy order of work in progress. Leonardo's early experience there helps explain why the mature room around us does not feel divided into separate departments. A wing study, a mechanical sketch, a portrait, and a large compositional drawing can coexist because making has always involved several kinds of knowledge at once. The questions have expanded, but the habit of crossing boundaries is old. Several paintings connected with Verrocchio's workshop help us sense this collaborative setting. The baptism of Christ, now in the Uffizi, is traditionally associated with contributions by the young Leonardo, especially the angel on the left. The work is tempera and oil on wood, and it reflects a workshop context in which different hands could participate. Later writers told a memorable story that Leonardo's angel was so impressive that Verrocchio gave up painting. It is a charming anecdote, but it should be treated as later tradition rather than certain fact. The quieter truth is more useful. Leonardo developed within a workshop where collaboration, observation and technical learning mattered. The National Gallery's Tobias and the Angel is attributed to Verrocchio's workshop. Scholars have considered whether parts may involve the young Leonardo, while the attribution remains appropriately careful. Looking at a work like this, the modern desire to assign every detail to one individual encounters the reality of workshop practice. The painting is not less interesting because more than one hand may have contributed. It becomes a record of a shared environment. We can imagine the young Leonardo learning to attend to details that others might pass over. The curls of hair, the changing surface of water, the anatomy suggested beneath a sleeve, the plant near a path, the reflection on a fish or metal object. Not every detail must be assigned to him in a particular work for the pattern to matter. His later drawings confirm a sustained fascination with the visible world. Verrocchio's work in bronze gives this cross-media culture additional weight. Bronze casting asks for planning, modelling, technical confidence, and an acceptance that the material process can be unforgiving. A sculptural idea must survive translation through stages: moulds, channels, heat, metal, weight, and support all matter. The final object may appear solid and inevitable, but its creation is anything but effortless. Leonardo's later plans for the enormous Sforza horse in Milan carry something of this inheritance forward. The equestrian monument was never cast, yet his surviving studies show prolonged attention to the practical challenge. The horse had to be conceived not only as an image, but as a massive physical object. How would the metal flow? How would the structure hold? How could something of such scale emerge from a controlled process? The project belongs to Milan rather than tonight's Florence workshop, but it illuminates the education behind Leonardo's mature habits. The line from Verrocchio to Leonardo is not a simple transfer of answers. It is a transfer of seriousness toward materials. An ambitious image must still be made. A beautiful form must still be supported. A visionary idea must still pass through heat, weight, wood, paper, or plaster. Apprenticeship taught respect for the stages between conception and object. Florence itself served as an extension of the workshop. Sculpture occupied public space. Architecture made proportion unavoidable. The dome rose over daily life. Markets, streets, animals, clothing, weather, and faces offered more material than any one person could exhaust. A young artist learned not only from the master, but from the city. The Annunciation, associated with Leonardo's early career and now in the Uffizi, reveals the importance of landscape, atmosphere, architecture, and careful observation in his development. The Adoration of the Magi, commissioned for San Donato a Scopeto, and left unfinished when Leonardo departed for Milan in 1482, offers another kind of insight. Because it remains incomplete, viewers can see the restless process beneath the intended finish. Figures emerging, ideas revised, and the composition still alive with thought. The Uffizi has noted that its unfinished state makes Leonardo's creative process visible through sketches, second thoughts, and reconsiderations. That unfinished work speaks quietly to the Anghiari cartoon in the room around us. Decades have passed, and the scale of the commission has changed, but the visible process remains familiar. Leonardo begins, studies, adjusts, and searches. The page or surface carries the movement of thought. Completion is not guaranteed merely because the idea is powerful. It would be easy to turn this into a story of failure, but that would miss the tone of the evidence. An unfinished work can be deeply informative. It can show how an artist approaches a problem before the final layers conceal the changes. It can preserve pathways not taken. The viewer encounters not only the image but the time spent looking for it. The mature Leonardo may or may not have spent an evening consciously remembering Verrocchio's workshop. We should not invent private thoughts and place them in his mind, but the habits formed there remain present in his hands. The choice of a tool, the respect for preparation, the ability to move between media, and the acceptance that a large object depends on many small tasks, all carry the apprenticeship forward. There is comfort in this continuity. Even an artist remembered for unusual independence was shaped by instruction. He began somewhere. He watched, he practiced, he repeated ordinary tasks, he learned what materials would and would not do. He learned from other people's work before later generations began studying his own. The chain extends beyond Verrocchio as well. A workshop contains inherited methods, local knowledge, suppliers, patrons, assistants, and traditions altered slowly through practice. No artist invents the physical world from nothing. Leonardo's originality becomes more interesting when placed inside that chain. He receives knowledge and then pushes it into unfamiliar directions. By this late hour, the memory of the earlier shop does not need to remain vivid. It can fade gently into the room at Santa Maria Novella. The lamp shows us present objects again. A table, a page, tools set down, a support leaning in shadow. The sounds of the busy apprenticeship years are far away. The master who once instructed Leonardo has been gone for many years. The young apprentice has become the experienced artist. Florence has changed around him. Still, the lesson of the workshop remains simple. Great attention is built from repeated attention. A hand learns by returning. A surface improves because someone prepared it carefully. A drawing develops because the eye did not stop at the first attempt. Outside, the city has become quieter than before. The late evening is no longer only approaching, it has arrived. The time has come to put the room gently in order and allow the unfinished work to rest. There is a point in every long work-day when continuing becomes less useful than stopping. The decision is not always announced. It may begin with something practical. A line can no longer be judged fairly in the available light. The room has become cool, or a tool is cleaned instead of returned immediately to the hand. The work does not end because every question has been answered. It ends because the questions will be better served by rest. In the Sala del Papa, the closing of the workshop happens one small action at a time. A sheet of paper is lifted carefully and placed where its surface will not be rubbed or bent. Another remains flat because the ink may not yet be fully dry. A piece of chalk is gathered from the table. A pen is set aside. A container is checked. Nothing is rushed. Fire and flame require attention in a room filled with paper, wood, cloth, and other materials that can be damaged easily. The lamp is useful, but it must remain a servant of the work rather than a danger to it. The large preparations for the Anghiari cartoon cannot simply be folded away like a letter. Scale has its own demands. Part of the work may stay where it is, protected as well as the circumstances allow. A surface that has occupied the room all day changes character at night. In the remaining light, it no longer invites active study in quite the same way. The figures become less immediate. The edges loosen. The whole composition settles into the background like a thought that has reached the limit of what can be done with it for now. This temporary withdrawal is not neglect. It is a form of care. A modern schedule can make stopping feel like failure, especially when work remains visibly unfinished. But a Renaissance workshop was filled with processes that imposed waiting. A layer of paint needed time, a prepared surface needed time, a large design needed another inspection in daylight, a mind needed distance from a problem before returning with a clearer eye. The pace of material work contains natural pauses. Leonardo's notebooks make these pauses visible in another way. A thought may break off and return later. A question may remain open for years. A subject can reappear in a different place and at a different scale. The unfinished page is not always abandoned. Sometimes it's simply resting between encounters. Near the table, the wing study can be placed beside other papers. Its questions about air remain intact even after the lamp dims. A line of water waits in its curve. A mechanical arrangement no longer needs to move through the imagination tonight. The room holds these things without insisting that they be resolved. There is comfort in that. The day can close around incomplete work without erasing its value. Outside the building, Florence has changed while we were indoors. The streets are not empty, but the pattern of movement is different now. Daytime business has mostly withdrawn. Doors are closed. Shutters have narrowed the connection between household interiors and the street. A few people continue along familiar routes. Somewhere, a late task still requires attention. Somewhere else, conversation has softened around a table. The city has entered the slower hours when its public face gives way to smaller private spaces. Lighting after dark is precious enough to shape behaviour. Lamps and candles extend activity, but not with the broad, effortless brightness of a modern room. Light gathers around particular places: a table, a doorway, a devotional image, a small cluster of people, a page. Beyond that local glow, the edges of a space retreat. Night teaches the eye to accept partial knowledge. This is another reason the workshop feels so different now. Earlier, daylight connected the objects more evenly. The table, wall, papers and floor belonged visibly to one room. Under lamplight, each object arrives separately. A tool catches a brief reflection. A folded cloth becomes a darker shape. The wooden grain on the nearest surface appears stronger because so much else has receded. The larger room is still present, but it no longer demands to be inspected. The final tasks have their own sounds. A small object is set down against wood. Paper moves softly. A stool shifts. A container closes. Footsteps cross the floor and return. These sounds do not interrupt the quiet. They define it. Perhaps an assistant has remained long enough to help put something in order, or perhaps Leonardo is alone for this final portion of the evening. The evidence does not tell us. We do not need to decide. The essential feeling survives either way. Activity has narrowed. The day's shared labour has become a small sequence of closing gestures. If someone else is present, the companionship can remain almost wordless. Skilled work often develops its own unspoken rhythm. Each person knows which item needs to be moved and which surface should not be touched. A glance is enough. If Leonardo is alone, the same rhythm continues through habit. The room has taught him where things belong. The ordinary nature of this moment matters. Leonardo's life is often narrated through exceptional projects, unusual observations, and the range of his interests. Yet ordinary acts close his day as they close anyone's. A page must be protected, a flame must be lowered, a door must be secured, the body must leave the table eventually. As the workshop settles, the various projects no longer compete for attention. The large cartoon occupies one portion of the room. The portrait we associate with these Florentine years belongs to another tempo, and perhaps another location. Notebook pages hold their private streams of writing. Water and air continue beyond the walls. For a while, everything's allowed to exist without being actively pursued. This release makes space for the city again. When we step toward the doorway, the echo changes. The workroom had become its own contained world, but the surrounding spaces of Santa Maria Novella remind us that it belongs within a larger complex. Stone underfoot holds the coolness of evening. A passage that seemed merely transitional on the way in now feels like part of the departure. The threshold is crossed in the opposite direction. The workshop door closes behind us, though we do not need to imagine the exact mechanism or sound. The important fact is simple. The room remains on one side, and the evening city opens on the other. For a moment it is pleasant to pause nearby. The facade, courtyards, walls, and passages of Santa Maria Novella gather darkness without losing their form completely. The air is cooler than it was when we arrived. The last retained warmth of the stone is fading. A lamp in the distance marks a doorway. Footsteps travel briefly through the quiet and then disappear. The bells may be heard again, differently now. Earlier they belonged to the city winding down from labour. At this later hour, each sound seems to have more space around it. The note leaves the tower, crosses roofs, and reaches the listener after passing through the architecture of Florence. It does not belong to one room. It belongs to the night as a whole. We begin walking away slowly. The route does not need to become a formal tour. Florence can remain a sequence of impressions. A narrow street holds shadow. An upper window glows faintly. The corner of a building interrupts the view and then reveals another stretch of stone. A household has drawn inward. A small flame moves behind a shutter. Somewhere, water is carried. A final errand completed, or a quiet conversation brought toward its end. The city is still physical beneath the softness. Street surfaces are uneven. Walls rise close in places. The air may carry the faint smells of cooking, smoke, damp stone, animals, and river moisture. These scents mix rather than arrange themselves neatly. Florence after dark is not silent or purified. It is simply less exposed. The workday has left traces everywhere. A closed shop front hides its tools until morning. A cart stands where it will be needed again. A bundle rests inside a doorway. A craft practiced for hours has paused without vanishing. Leonardo's room is one part of this larger pattern. His work is unusual in its range, but the act of stopping joins him to the rest of the city. It is useful to hold this balance. We can admire Leonardo without separating him entirely from Florence. The city supplied commissions, materials, teachers, rivals, patrons, assistants, streets, faces, animals, water, architecture, and light. It supplied problems worth solving and limits that could not be ignored. His imagination widened beyond the city walls, but it continued to work through the world immediately around him. The dome remains somewhere above the roofs, less visible now. By day, it helps organize the skyline. At night, it becomes a darker mass against the sky, still present even when the details disappear. The same is true of much of Florence. Familiar forms do not vanish, they become quieter. A little farther on, the direction of the Arno can be sensed again. The river does not close for the night. It keeps moving beneath the bridges, carrying reflected lights in broken fragments. The surface may be difficult to read from a distance. One moment it appears dark. The next, a small ripple catches a lamp or a piece of sky. The current continues whether anyone is studying it or not. This is perhaps the most peaceful thought of the evening. Leonardo's drawings are acts of attention, but the world does not depend upon being drawn. Birds have settled, yet air moves. The city has quieted, yet the river passes. Paint dries in darkness. A page waits. The physical world continues its processes without requiring constant supervision. The listener, too, can step away from the day's unfinished tasks. There is no need to carry every question forward into the night. Some can remain in their proper rooms. A problem can stay on the table. A conversation can wait until morning. A plan can be returned to under better light. Rest is not the opposite of attention. It is one of the conditions that allows attention to return. The workshop teaches this gently because it contains so much incompletion without becoming chaotic. The Anghiari cartoon is still developing. The portrait is not frozen into its final state. Water studies will continue across future pages. Flight will remain a field of possibility and difficulty. Materials will require patience. The influence of apprenticeship will continue through habits too familiar to announce themselves. None of this needs to be summarized loudly. It can simply remain behind the closed door. We walk on through Florence, allowing distance to grow. The room becomes harder to picture in detail, and that is all right. At first we could distinguish the paper, wood, tools and lamplight. Now the memory becomes broader. A warm area within stone walls, a place where questions were given time. The city offers other rooms of its own. A family prepares to sleep. A servant checks a latch. A craftsman thinks briefly of tomorrow's work and then lets the thought go. A traveller settles in unfamiliar lodging. Within the religious complex, the hours follow rhythms older than any one commission. Each small interior contains a life beyond our view. The slightly lonely quality of the evening remains, but it is no longer located only in Leonardo's workspace. It belongs to the hour itself. Night separates people into their own rooms, their own beds, their own thoughts. Yet the separation is gentle rather than bleak. The same darkness gathers over every roof. The same bells cross the same air. The river passes all of them. Perhaps this is why an evening in a workshop can feel more intimate than a daytime visit to a famous place. Daylight encourages explanation. It makes us want to identify each object and connect each fact. Night permits uncertainty. We can know enough and then stop. The unknown parts of the room are not failures of the imagination. They are a respectful boundary. We do not know exactly how Leonardo organized his papers that night. We do not know which assistant may have remained, which note may have been added, or which project occupied the final minutes. We know that he received the keys to the Sala del Papa for work connected with the Anghiari cartoon. We know that these Florentine years included major artistic and observational concerns. We know that his surviving pages reveal a long habit of looking. The rest can remain carefully imagined rather than declared. That distinction makes the scene calmer. It frees us from the need to turn Leonardo into a character performing greatness for an audience. He can simply leave the room when the workday ends. The papers do not glow with prophecy. The tools do not announce the future. The lamp is extinguished because lamps are extinguished. The door closes because another day will come. As we near the river, the reflected lights stretch and break. A ripple carries one small brightness outward until it disappears among darker movements. Another replaces it. The pattern does not repeat exactly. Leonardo might have appreciated that. A current is never a single fixed form, yet it is not without order. The same could be said of a life in work. Years gather around repeated practices, drawing, watching, testing, returning, setting aside and beginning again. Some efforts become famous. Some remain on pages read only much later. Some do not survive. Meaning is not limited to the finished object. The walk continues at an unhurried pace. Behind us, Santa Maria Novella recedes into the larger fabric of Florence. Ahead, the streets become softer and less distinct. There is no destination we need to reach quickly. The purpose of the walk is simply to leave the workshop gently, without snapping the thread of the evening. The hour has its own visual lesson as well. During the walk away from Santa Maria Novella, the city is never revealed all at once. A lamp makes a patch of stone visible, then the next stretch returns to shadow. The mind learns to accept intervals. One illuminated doorway is enough. One reflected line on the river is enough. The darkness between them does not need to be filled. This partial view mirrors the way history reaches us. We have keys recorded in a document, drawings preserved in collections, paintings carried across centuries, later accounts, technical studies, and the patient work of scholars. Between those points are spaces that remain uncertain. Responsible imagination can walk among them carefully, using what is known without pretending every shadow contains a fact. The result is not a poorer evening, it is a more honest one. The room can feel inhabited even when its exact inventory is lost. Leonardo can feel human even when we refuse to invent his private words. Florence can feel close even when no single description captures one exact night. We let the intervals remain. We let the city appear in small portions. A wall, a shutter, a bell, a current, and a distant lamp are enough to guide us home. One more bell crosses the roofs. One more footstep fades behind a corner. The Arno carries its dark, patient motion beyond the edge of sight. There is one last kindness in the image of the closed workshop. It does not ask the listener to remain alert in order to guard the work. The papers are placed as carefully as the evening permits. The lamp has been attended to. The door stands between the vulnerable surfaces and the wider street. Mourning belongs to another part of the story. Rest can be understood in the same practical way. It is not an empty interval between useful hours. It is a condition with its own purpose. The eye recovers from close attention. The hand releases its tension. A thought that has been pressed too firmly may return with more space around it. Even materials continue their quiet work while no one watches. A layer settles, ink dries, wood responds to the air, and the river keeps its course. The workshop will not be exactly the same when it opens again. Daylight will enter at a new angle. The city will bring different sounds. A question may look easier or more difficult after sleep. But nothing essential has been lost by allowing the night to exist fully. The city can rest now. The workshop can rest. And before we say good night, we can allow the last remaining light to stay for a moment longer in memory. At the beginning of the evening, we paused outside a doorway and wondered what it might have felt like to enter Leonardo da Vinci's workshop, before the name had gathered the weight of centuries. Now the doorway is behind us again. Florence has grown quiet, and the room at Santa Maria Novella has been left to its shadows. Nothing inside needed to become a spectacle. A sheet of paper was enough. A line turning like water was enough. A wing studied with patience was enough. A wooden panel waiting for another thin layer of paint was enough. The larger questions could remain larger than the hour available to them. Leonardo's work feels especially human when we allow it to remain unfinished for the night. The cartoon for the Battle of Anghiari does not need to be completed in our imagination. The portrait begun around these Florentine years does not need to reveal every secret of its expression. The notebooks do not need to become a catalogue of marvels. They can remain what they were in the hands of a working person, places to record, test, reconsider and return. Beyond the closed door, Florence continues in quieter forms. A lamp glows briefly behind a shutter. Stone cools after the day. A bell reaches across the roofs. The river moves beneath the bridges without asking to be watched. The questions within the workshop can follow the same rhythm. They do not disappear, but they loosen. The study of a horse, the curl of a current, the structure of a wing, the soft passage of shadow across a face, and the memory of an old apprenticeship can all settle into their proper places. Morning will bring a different light. It will reveal surfaces that the lamp could only suggest. It will call people back into streets and workshops. Tools will be lifted again. Pages will be opened. A new observation may enter beside an older one. The city will return to its working voice. But we do not need to follow it there tonight. For now, let the work table remain still. Let the ink dry. Let the panel rest. Let the papers keep their private lines. Let the faint shape of the wing remain on the page without needing to rise into the air. The room is safe in the darkness. The river continues beyond it. Florence is quiet, and wherever you are listening from, I hope the day has begun to release its hold a little. Thank you for spending this evening in Leonardo's workshop. Good night.
Thank you for watching Something About Sleep. Since you're clearly still awake, why don't you click on the next video and we'll see you there.